Mr. Dreyer over at Minchville High School, here to teach you a lesson about federalism for AP government. I'm going to split this video into two videos because it's a relatively big topic. This covers chapter 3 in the textbook. The first idea we have to ask ourselves is simply, what is federalism? This often confuses students. So let me go ahead and put a new page in here to draw a diagram. Federalism is a system of government where power is shared between a strong central government and smaller units. In our system, these are states. And this is the national government. Now, back when we talked about the Articles of Confederation, we talked about a confederate system. In a confederate system, the states gave a little bit of power to the national government, but not much. And we've already gone over the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. So the states retained almost all of the power. In a federal system, the states give much more power to the national government, and then the national government sort of shares power with the states. So these arrows go both directions. So obviously, in a federal system, the national government is more powerful. But we have to ask ourselves why, and also how has this changed over time? Because the national government, the federal government, has become more powerful. Now, I know this seems like a very simple topic, but actually it's not, because our entire history of this country is basically a debate between the power that this federal government has and the power that the states have. And we're still arguing this relationship today because the Constitution is moderately vague on a number of these topics. So it really depends on how we interpret the Constitution to answer the question, where should this power be? So let's go ahead and look at this screen here. I'm going to go over some basic powers. In the Constitution, there are written powers. These are powers given to the federal government. These are called enumerated powers, and there are a list of them in the Constitution, which we've already gone over. You should know most of the enumerated powers for an AP Gov test, but you should definitely know the big ones, which I'll show you on a different slide. Now, there's also something called the 10th Amendment, which is the last amendment in the Bill of Rights. The 10th Amendment said, if a power is not specifically given to the federal government or denied to the states, then it is reserved to the states. So really what they're saying is, unless the power is specifically taken away from the state, it's something you can't do. And unless it's something we gave to the federal government, then the states have it. So all powers that we didn't think about, the states reserve. The states have those powers. You need to know the idea of reserve powers and the 10th Amendment, because this is something that makes the states decently strong. Also, going back to enumerated powers, there's something called implied powers. There's something after the enumerated powers called the necessary and proper clause. But students often miss implied powers. Implied powers doesn't mean the federal government can do anything it wants to do. It has to justify the implied power by relating it back to an enumerated power. It has to say, well, we need this power to carry out an enumerated power. So for instance, we need to make a national bank because we need to carry out the enumerated power of coining money, borrowing money, and taxing. So these aren't just random powers that they come up with. There is a limit to them. Now, of course, people have argued about implied powers also, but there is a limit. There are denied powers in the Constitution. They are things the federal government cannot do, and also things the states cannot do. The most important being bills of attainder, which we've gone over, ex post facto laws, and denying habeas corpus. And also the federal government cannot give out titles of nobility. So they couldn't make George Washington a king even if they wanted to. We've kind of gone over all of those ideas, but one thing I want to stress is there's really two types of power. that we're discussing here, and this often confuses students. If you look at the federal government, there's different branches, which we're not going over right now. There's the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. So if you think about it, there's a line of power that's shared between those branches. And there's a whole different idea that's talked about, which is checks and balances and separation of powers. Then there's this idea of powers between the federal government and the states. As you can see right here, this is more of a vertical power line. Oftentimes I've noticed that students on AP tests will confuse the idea of separation of powers, and they'll talk about the powers the federal government has and the powers the states have. Keep in mind, if an AP test is talking about separation of powers, they're talking about how power is separated between the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branches. So they're talking about how federal power is separated in the federal government. So don't make that mistake. But this is a good opportunity to talk about what powers the states have and what powers are shared. Here's a new word, concurrent powers. There are some powers that the federal government has and the state governments also have. And actually in chapter 3 there's a nice little diagram. Another good reason to read the chapters. They have little diagrams and nice little charts to help you learn these things. So let's look at some of these powers. We've gone over enumerated powers already. These are listed in the Constitution. I didn't list all of them, but I listed some important ones. Regulate commerce among the states with foreign nations and Indian tribes. So this is the famous Commerce Clause, which gives the federal government quite a bit of power. On the other hand, it depends on how you interpret commerce and what you think of as commerce. So when the Constitution was first ratified, people thought of commerce as bales of hay and grain and physical goods, tobacco, things like that. They are physical items. Well, today we're in a much more advanced society. So what about the internet? What about shopping online? What about advanced transportation services where planes fly between states? Well, as it turns out, the government can also regulate all of those things now also. And so we're going to go back and talk about that later because the Commerce Clause is very important when it comes to the federal government expanding their power. They've used the Commerce Clause. And we see coin money, post offices, wars, so on and so forth. And my point to students is always this. Let's just think of something the government can do, the federal government, and then we have to go find the power in the Constitution. So for example, what about education? The federal government obviously gives money to states and the federal government makes rules for education, but we don't really see that anywhere. There's nothing in here that says the federal government should make any rules for education. So where does this power come from? How do they get this power? Well, and this is my major example of how there's a lot of gray areas in the Constitution. You know when you always hear people say, well, it's in the Constitution. Well, actually, a lot of this stuff isn't in the Constitution, and that's why we have to interpret the Constitution. And how we interpret it over time can also change, and that is something called informal amendments, or informally changing our interpretation of what the Constitution means. Okay. Here's some powers we reserve to the states. Set times, places, and manner of elections. And this is important because remember back when we talked about voting rights, and we're going to talk a lot more about voting rights. The states themselves could decide who could vote. The states originally decided women couldn't vote. They decided slaves couldn't vote. They decided men who didn't have enough property couldn't vote. So the states themselves could set the criteria for who could vote and who couldn't vote. Some states originally let free black people vote, and some states did not. The states had a lot of power in terms of voting. We're going to talk about how over time the states have lost a lot of this power here because of amendments to the Constitution. Of course, the states can ratify amendments. We talked about that with the amendment process. They can make all sorts of laws for health, safety, and morals. So if you think about it, there's all sorts of state laws. There's state laws against stealing, against killing people, against littering. So there's a lot of laws the states can make as long as they do not explicitly contradict the Constitution. There's something in Chapter 3 called Dillon's Rule. Dillon's Rule is this idea that the states really are their own governments, but inside of a state you have cities, you have counties, and you have all of these other localities. If we think about the city here, it has a mayor and it has a city council. But the thing is, the cities and counties within a state have no power inherently unto themselves. Dillon's rule says that all of the power for these localities in the states are given to them by the local governments. So the state governments, the local government. So the state government can actually revoke the charters that they give to these cities and counties. Okay? Just so we're clear on that. Every now and then I've seen this pop up on some of the older AP tests. I don't know if it's in the more current curriculum. I'd have to check. But hey, knowing a little bit more is not bad. And of course, they can regulate commerce within a state. I sort of laugh because nowadays there's almost nothing that you can think of as commerce within a state, but there are a few things. So, for instance, granting liquor licenses to restaurants and bars, and making rules for restaurants, like health rules inside of the state. On the other hand, the federal government can also inspect a lot of these restaurants. Okay, so here's some concurrent powers. These are things that both the states and the federal government can do. Everybody can tax. And if you think about it, if you work, you know that money is taken out for the state and money is taken out for the federal government. On top of that, if you own property, property tax is taken out. And then, of course, there's localities that have sales taxes. So there's a lot of taxing going on. Obviously, a state can borrow money, and actually many states are in debt, just like the federal government. They can both make and enforce laws, charter banks and corporations, and spend money for the general welfare. So these are the sort of things here that you really kind of need to memorize. These are the things that you would see questions on, any of these powers. Especially the AP test. The AP test is going to focus on big ideas, but they're still going to ask for examples. So in order to answer big ideas, you have to know some facts and you have to have some examples. Okay, let's go ahead and move on here. One of the biggest ways the federal government can basically impose its will on state governments is by giving it money. And the most important thing that they've done is something called the 16th Amendment. The 16th Amendment to the Constitution gave the federal government the ability to tax income. I've actually seen the 16th Amendment on AP tests before, because they'll ask you a question like, hey, how did the 16th Amendment increase federal power or change the relationship between the states and the federal government? And then you'll have to say, well, the 16th Amendment gave the federal government a lot more money. Now, I know you're thinking, wait a minute, hold on, didn't you just say in this list up here that the federal government could tax? That is true, but it wasn't specifically an income tax in the Constitution. So they had to add an amendment saying income. The federal government could tax income. And once they started doing that, they got tons of money. And the federal government gives this money to states in the form of block grants and categorical grants. Block grants are just big chunks of money. The federal government will give these to the states to do whatever they want. Categorical grants are grants for specific things. An example would be the federal government gives the states money for special education services in their schools. It has to be used for that purpose. A block grant example would just be they give a state $200 million. It's sort of like if your parents give you money. Let's say your parents give you $100 and say, hey, go out and have a good time this weekend. That's sort of a block grant. You can do whatever you want with it within reason. Categorical grant would be your parents give you $100 and say, go out and buy some new school clothes and some school supplies. Of course, nowadays, $100 would buy you part of a pair of shoes, but you might be able to buy some pens and pencils. Okay, so this sort of 16th Amendment really changed the relationship between the federal government and the states. Before that, the states had a lot more power and they didn't get all of this federal money. After this, they got all of this federal money, and we all know what happens when you give money to people. They want more of it constantly, and it's hard to take it away. There is also something called unfunded mandates. These are things the federal government will make the states do, will ask them to do, will tell them to do, but not give them any money for it. And in the textbook, one example is No Child Left Behind, which was a federal law in 2001 that said the states had to do a lot of things in their schools, like standardized testing, to meet certain criteria, but they didn't provide them any money for making these tests or for testing equipment or anything else. This is the classic sort of example, and also the Americans with Disabilities Act, which the federal government said states had to make all of these public buildings accessible to people with disabilities, like libraries and courthouses and schools, and you had to put in things like elevators and ramps and so on, which costs a lot of money. So I have seen the idea of unfunded mandates come up. Okay, that's enough for this video. On the next video, we're going to talk more about how the relationship between the states and the federal government has changed, and we'll go into some really specific amendments and also talk about a few examples.